If you drink that, you won't make it to the end of this meeting." The words were soft, almost lost beneath the low hum of conversation and the faint clink of crystal glasses, but they stopped Daniel Whitmore mid-motion, his hand hovering inches from his lips as the amber liquid inside the glass caught the chandelier light. Steady, untouched, and for a moment he didn't look at the drink. He looked at her, the waitress, Emily Carter, standing beside the table with the same calm posture she had carried all evening, shoulders relaxed, eyes clear, not pleading, not afraid, just certain, and that was what unsettled him, not the interruption, not the audacity, but the absence of hesitation in someone who had no authority to speak. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low, controlled, drawing a few glances from the men seated around him, partners, investors, people who measured time in millions and decisions in seconds. Emily didn't repeat herself. She simply reached forward, her movement smooth, almost invisible, and replaced the glass in his hand with another from the tray as if correcting a minor mistake. Nothing more, nothing dramatic, just a quiet adjustment that should have meant nothing. And yet the air shifted, something subtle, something wrong. Daniel frowned, watching her now, really watching her. The way her eyes flicked briefly across the table, not at him, but at someone else, someone seated just beyond his direct line of sight, and then back again, steady, composed, as if she had already made a decision long before he noticed. "You're out of line," one of the executives muttered, half amused, half annoyed, but Emily didn't respond. She stepped back, hands folded lightly in front of her apron, the perfect picture of professionalism. Except for one thing, she didn't leave, and waitresses always left. They delivered, they disappeared, they stayed invisible, but she remained, and that was when it happened. A man at the far end of the table reached for the untouched glass, the original one, the one Emily had taken away from Daniel. He lifted it casually, mid-sentence, not noticing the way her gaze sharpened just slightly, not enough for anyone else to see, just enough to confirm something only she understood. The glass touched his lips, a sip, nothing more, and then a pause, his expression flickering, confusion passing like a shadow across his face as his fingers loosened and the glass slipped, shattering against the marble floor in a sharp, echoing crack that cut through the room. Conversation died instantly, chairs stilled, every eye turning. Daniel's grip tightened around the new glass in his hand. Untouched, forgotten, his pulse suddenly louder. Then the noise around him. And through it all, Emily didn't move. She didn't rush forward, didn't panic. She simply looked at the broken glass, then lifted her gaze, calm, precise, and said, "It's a cyanide derivative, low concentration, delayed onset." The words landed heavier than any shout, and now everyone was staring at her. Not the man, not the glass, her. The waitress who spoke like she didn't belong in this room, like she understood something none of them did. Daniel's voice came slower. This time, sharper. "How would you know that?" And for the first time, Emily's eyes met his fully, steady, unflinching, but she didn't answer him. Not yet. Instead, she shifted her gaze past him, toward the other side of the table, toward a man who had gone very still. "Because," she said quietly, "he wasn't the one you were trying to watch." No one spoke for a full second, and in a room where seconds usually meant millions, that silence felt heavier than anything Daniel Whitmore had ever negotiated. His eyes followed Emily's gaze across the table, landing on Victor Hale, a partner who had been with them for nearly 2 years, quiet, precise, the kind of man who never drew attention, and now he was doing exactly that by not moving at all, his hand still resting beside his untouched drink, his expression carefully neutral, too. Carefully, Daniel set his glass down slowly, the sound almost too loud in the stillness. "Explain," he said, his voice lower now, stripped of irritation, replaced with something sharper, something focused. Emily did not rush. She stepped closer to the table, just enough to be heard without raising her voice. "The scent," she said, "barely noticeable, but wrong for this type of bourbon." And the glass. Her eyes flicked briefly to the broken shards on the floor. It was placed differently from the others, rotated slightly counterclockwise, like someone not used to service etiquette set it down. A few of the executives exchanged confused glances, but Daniel did not look away from her. "That is not proof," Victor said suddenly, his tone smooth. controlled. But there was a tightness beneath it now, something that had not been there before. Emily nodded once, as if she expected the objection. No, it is not, she agreed calmly. But patterns are. She turned her attention fully to him now. And for the first time, the room felt like it was shifting, the balance changing in a way no one could quite explain. You have not touched your drink, she continued, even before I said anything. And when the tray arrived, you watched the server, not the CEO, not the contract, the tray. Victor let out a quiet breath that might have been a laugh in another moment. Observation is not evidence, he replied, but his fingers curled slightly against the table, a small movement, almost invisible. Emily saw it. Daniel saw it too, and something in his chest tightened, not fear, not yet, but recognition, the kind that comes when a deal starts to turn. You are right, Emily said again, her tone unchanged. So let me ask you something instead. She paused, just long enough to draw every eye in the room to her. Why did your assistant switch the service tray 3 minutes before it reached this table? The question landed with a precision that cut through the tension. Victor's expression flickered, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Daniel turned sharply toward the far end of the room where the staff had been moving in and out, replaying the last few minutes in his mind. The subtle shift, the unfamiliar face among the servers. Details he had ignored because they seemed irrelevant, because people like him did not need to notice. Things like that, except now he did, and now it mattered. That is a serious accusation, Victor said, his voice quieter now, measured, but the confidence was gone, replaced by calculation. Emily did not step back. She did not raise her voice. She simply held his gaze, steady, unwavering. No, she said softly. It is a question. Another pause, longer this time, stretching just enough to make the silence uncomfortable, undeniable. And then she added, and you already know the answer. Daniel felt it then. The shift, not in the room, but in himself, the realization that he had been seconds away from something irreversible, stopped not by security, not by strategy, but by a woman no one had thought to listen to. And for the first time that night, he did not look at the deal in front of him. He did not look at the men around him. He looked at Emily Carter, the waitress who had seen everything he had missed, and he understood one thing with absolute clarity. This conversation was no longer about business. Victor did not answer immediately, and that was the answer. Not the words, not the denial, but the hesitation, the fraction of a second where control slipped and something real showed through. Daniel saw it clearly now. The same way he had spotted weaknesses in negotiations for years. The same way he had built an empire by noticing what others missed, except this time, he had not been the first to see it. Emily had, and that realization settled deeper than the tension in the room. Call. Security, someone whispered from the far end of the table, but Daniel did not move. Not yet. His gaze remained locked on Victor, measuring, recalculating. You are making a mistake, Victor said finally, his voice steady again, but it sounded rehearsed now, like a line delivered too late. A waitress makes an accusation, and suddenly this becomes a courtroom. Daniel leaned back slightly. His posture relaxed in a way that made everyone else uneasy, because they knew that look, it meant he was thinking, not reacting. No, Daniel said quietly. This becomes a pattern. His eyes shifted briefly to Emily, then back to Victor. And I have built my entire career on patterns. The words hung in the air, not loud, but final. Victor's jaw tightened, just enough to confirm what everyone was beginning to understand. The room was no longer neutral ground. It had tilted, and he was standing on the wrong side of it. Emily stepped back then, not retreating, but removing herself from the center, as if her role had already been fulfilled. But Daniel noticed something else. She was still watching, not Victor, not the executives, but the door to the service corridor, her attention sharp, focused, as if the story was not over yet. And that was when Daniel realized something else. This had never been about one glass, one moment, one mistake. This was part of something larger, something planned. Lock the doors, Daniel said suddenly, his voice cutting through the room with quiet authority. A few heads turned in surprise, but no one argued. Not now. Not after what they had just seen. A manager rushed to comply, the soft click echoing louder than expected. Victor let out a slow breath, his shoulders dropping slightly. not in defeat, but in adjustment, recalibration. "You think this ends here," he said, almost conversational now, and for the first time, there was something honest in his tone, not confidence, not arrogance, but inevitability. Emily's eyes shifted again, just slightly, toward the corridor, and then back to Daniel. "It does not," she said softly, and Daniel felt it again. That same certainty, the same calm that had stopped him from lifting the glass minutes earlier. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice lower now, more controlled than before. Emily did not answer right away. She took a single step closer, her gaze steady. "The person who switched the tray," she said, "they are not here for him." A small pause, just enough for the implication to settle. "They are here to make sure no one asks questions after." Daniel's mind moved quickly, faster than the tension, faster than the fear that had begun to creep into the edges of the room. He looked toward the corridor now, following her line of sight, seeing not just a doorway, but a variable he had not accounted for. And that was something he did not tolerate, not in business, not in life. "Then we do not." "Wait," he said, standing now, his chair sliding back with a quiet scrape, every movement deliberate, every second measured. "We find them first." And as the room began to shift into motion, controlled, but urgent, Daniel realized something that would stay with him long after this night ended. The most dangerous thing in the room had not been the glass. It had been the assumption that he saw everything, and the only reason he was still standing was because someone else had been paying attention. The room did not erupt into chaos. It tightened instead, like a breath held too long, controlled, contained, every movement now deliberate, as if everyone understood that rushing would only make things worse. Daniel moved first, not toward the door, but toward the center of the room, positioning himself where he could see both the corridor and the table, where power belonged. But this time his attention kept drifting back to Emily, because she was not following the panic. She was tracking something else, something quieter. "You said they are not here for him," Daniel said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Emily nodded once, her eyes still fixed on the corridor. "The tray switch was not the end," she replied. "It was the signal." Daniel's gaze sharpened. "Signal for what?" he asked, and for the first time, Emily hesitated, not out of fear, but calculation, as if choosing how much to reveal. "For movement," she said finally. "Someone is supposed to leave before anyone realizes what happened." Daniel turned his head slightly, scanning the room again. Not the obvious exits, but the subtle ones, the staff doors, the service paths, the places people ignored because they seemed unimportant. And that was when he saw it, a figure near the corridor, not running, not even walking fast, just moving with purpose, too calm for someone in a room that had just shifted this dramatically. "There," Emily said softly, confirming what he already noticed. Daniel did not shout, did not point. He simply adjusted his stance, blocking the direct path to the main exit while two members of his security team, now alert, moved to intercept without drawing attention. The figure paused for half a second, just enough to register the change, then continued. But the rhythm was off now, the confidence cracked, and in moments, the quiet interception happened. No struggle, no scene, just a firm stop and a controlled escort back into the room. Conversations did not resume. No one pretended this was normal anymore. The illusion had been broken too cleanly. Daniel watched closely, not the person being held, but Victor, and there it was again, that flicker, that brief tightening around the eyes that confirmed more than any confession could. This was connected, this was planned, and it had failed, not because of him, not because of his systems or his instincts, but because one person had noticed something small and refused to ignore it. Emily stepped back once more, returning to the edge of the room, almost invisible again. But Daniel did not let her disappear this time. "Stay," he said, not loudly, but with enough authority that she paused, turning slightly toward him. "You are not finished here," he added, and there was no command in his tone now, only recognition. Emily held his gaze for a moment, then gave a small nod, not submissive, not impressed, just acknowledging the truth of the situation. Across the room, the intercepted staff member avoided eye contact, their silence louder than any denial, and Victor finally looked away, breaking the last thread of composure he had been holding on to. Daniel exhaled slowly, the weight of what almost happened settling in layers. But beneath it, something else was forming, a shift in perspective, a recalibration he did not often allow. He glanced once more at Emily, at the woman who had seen through a room full of power, and found the one thing that mattered. And he understood that whatever came next, whatever questions needed answers, whatever consequences followed, it would begin with her, because for the first time that night, she was not the background. She was the reason the story had not ended very differently. The man they stopped did not resist, and that was the first thing Daniel noticed. Not fear, not confusion, just acceptance, like someone who had already calculated the outcome and adjusted to it. His eyes remained lowered, his breathing steady, too steady for an innocent mistake, and that alone told Daniel more than any explanation could. "Check his credentials," Daniel said quietly, and one of his security officers nodded, already moving with practiced efficiency. But Daniel's attention shifted again, not to the man, not to Victor, but to Emily, because she was still watching, not reacting, not seeking approval, just observing as if this moment was another piece in a larger pattern only she could see. "You knew there would be someone else," Daniel said, stepping closer to her, his voice lower now, stripped of command, replaced with something more precise, more curious. Emily did not answer immediately. Her gaze moved briefly across the room, tracing lines that no one else seemed to notice, the positioning of staff, the placement of trays, the subtle gaps in movement. And then she spoke. "Not new," she said softly. "Expected." Daniel studied her. The distinction mattered. Expected meant logic, not instinct. Meant she had built a conclusion from details others ignored. "Based on what?" he asked. And this time she met his eyes fully. "Because the first move was too clean," she replied. "Too controlled. It was not meant to create chaos. It was meant to pass unnoticed." She paused, just long enough for the weight of that to settle. "Which means it was not the only move." Daniel exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that comes when a situation shifts from reaction to strategy. He turned slightly, looking at Victor again, but the man was no longer holding his ground. His posture had changed, subtle, but undeniable, the confidence replaced by calculation that no longer worked. "You built this," Daniel said, not as a question, but as a statement. Victor's silence confirmed it more clearly than any words could, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold itself in place, waiting for something louder, something decisive, but it did not come. Instead, Daniel looked back at Emily, because the loud part had already passed. The real moment had been quiet, almost invisible, and that was where everything had changed. "Why step in?" he asked, and the question was not about the glass anymore, not about the poison, but about her. Emily's expression did not shift, not even slightly. "Because you were not paying attention," she said, her voice even, not accusing, not emotional, just true. And for the first time that night, Daniel Whitmore did not respond immediately, because he knew she was right, not just about the moment, but about something deeper, something that extended beyond this room, beyond this deal, into the way he had built his world and the assumptions that came with it. He glanced once more at the man being held, then at Victor, then back to Emily, and something settled into place, not as a realization, but as a decision. "You are not just a waitress," he said, and it was not a compliment, not yet, just an acknowledgement of fact. Emily gave the smallest hint of a smile, almost invisible. "No," she said quietly. "I am just the one who noticed first." And in that moment, Daniel understood that what had been stopped tonight was not just a plan, it was a blind spot, and the most valuable thing in the room was not power, not money, not control, but the ability to see what everyone else had already decided to ignore. Daniel did not speak right away, and that alone shifted the room again, because men like him filled silence with decisions, not questions. Yet now he stood still, studying something he could not quantify in numbers or leverage in a deal. Emily Carter did not look away. She did not lower her gaze or step back into the safety of invisibility. She simply waited, not for permission, but for the moment to move forward. "You said you expected it," Daniel said finally, his voice quieter now, almost measured against hers. "So you have seen this before." Emily tilted her head slightly, not confirming, not denying, just acknowledging the direction of his thinking. "Patterns repeat," she replied. "People believe small details do not matter, so they build plans around that assumption. Daniel let out a slow breath, the kind that signaled understanding rather than frustration. He glanced toward the intercepted man again, now being quietly escorted toward a side room, then back to Victor, who had said nothing since, his silence no longer strategic, just empty. "And you noticed the details," Daniel said, more to himself than to her. Emily did not respond, because she did not need to. The evidence was already in the room, in the broken glass, in the untouched drink, in the man who had almost walked out unnoticed. Daniel took a step closer, lowering his voice further. "Why this job?" he asked, and it was not a casual question, not curiosity for its own sake. It was calculation again, trying to place her, to understand where she fit in a world he controlled. Emily's expression shifted, just slightly, not guarded, but distant, as if the question reached somewhere she did not intend to go. "Because it lets people underestimate me," she said simply, and the answer landed with more weight than anything else she had said that night. Daniel watched her carefully, seeing not just what she had done, but what she had chosen, the position, the silence, the way she moved through a room without being seen until she decided to be. And for the first time, he recognized something unfamiliar, not threat, not competition, but alignment, a different kind of intelligence, one that did not announce itself. "You could have stayed quiet," Daniel said, not accusing, just stating a fact. Emily gave a small nod. "Yes," she said. "And you would have taken that sip." The simplicity of it removed any space for argument, any illusion of control he might have held on to. Daniel's jaw tightened for a moment, not out of anger, but realization, the narrow margin between what was and what almost was. He turned slightly, scanning the room once more. But now everything looked different. Every person, every movement, every assumption, recalibrated through a lens he had not used before. "From now on," he said slowly, his voice carrying just enough to reach the key people around him. "Nothing in this room is small." The words were not dramatic, not loud, but they changed the atmosphere instantly. People straightened, conversations stopped completely, attention sharpened, and at the edge of it all, Emily stood as she had before, calm, composed, unchanged, as if this shift was inevitable. Daniel looked back at her one last time, and this time there was no question in his eyes, only recognition, not of who she was, but of what she represented, the variable he had ignored, the detail he had dismissed, the difference between control and awareness. And in that moment, he understood something that would outlast the night. Power was not in seeing everything. It was in knowing what you had failed to see, and she had just shown him both. The room slowly began to breathe again, not with relief, but with awareness, the kind that settles in after something almost irreversible has been avoided. Conversations did not resume. They recalibrated, quieter, sharper, every word now chosen with more care, as if everyone understood that what had just happened was not an accident. Daniel remained where he stood, not returning to his seat, not reaching for the deal that had brought them all there, because that no longer felt like the center of the night. Emily turned slightly, as if preparing to step away, to return to the role everyone had assigned her before any of this began. But Daniel's voice stopped her. "You are not done yet," he said, not as an order, but as a statement of fact. Emily paused, her hand resting lightly against the edge of the table, her posture unchanged, but her attention fully on him again. "There is more," Daniel continued, his eyes scanning the room once more, slower now, more deliberate. "You would not still be watching if there was not." Emily held his gaze for a moment, then gave the smallest nod, not dramatic, not revealing, just enough to confirm what he already understood. "The plan depended on timing," she said quietly, "and timing rarely involves only one point of failure." Daniel's expression sharpened, the words aligning too easily with his own instincts, the kind that had built everything he owned. "So what are we missing?" he asked, and this time there was no edge in his voice, no challenge, just focus. Emily did not answer immediately. Her eyes moved again, not randomly, but tracing something invisible, a sequence, a pattern unfolding in real time. "The distraction is over," she said finally, "which means the fallback has already started." A few people nearby shifted uncomfortably, the word fallback landing heavier than expected. Daniel followed her line of sight again, this time not to the corridor, but but to the far corner of the room where a staff member adjusted a tray. That no one had ordered, a small detail, almost meaningless, except now it was not. That tray was not there before, Emily added softly, confirming his thought before he could speak it. Daniel moved without hesitation, not rushing, not drawing attention, just crossing the room with the same controlled presence that had defined him for years, but now with a different awareness guiding each step. The staff member looked up briefly, their expression neutral, practiced, but something in there. Timing was off, just slightly delayed, just enough to signal that they were not as composed as they appeared. Daniel stopped a few feet away, his gaze steady. Set it down, he said, calm, direct, the kind of tone that expected compliance. The tray lowered, carefully, but the moment stretched, thin, fragile, as if something unseen was waiting to break it. Behind him, Emily did not move closer. She did not need to. Her voice carried just enough. Look at the glasses, she said, and Daniel did. Not at the surface, but at the details, the arrangement, the spacing, the one glass that did not match the others by a fraction of an inch. And suddenly it was clear, not just a mistake, not just an oversight, but intention, layered, repeated, designed to pass unnoticed more than once. Daniel exhaled slowly, the realization settling deeper than before. This had never been a single attempt, it had been a system, and systems required understanding, not just reaction. He straightened slightly, his voice steady. We are done reacting, he said, not loudly, but with finality. Now we understand. And as the room shifted once more, not into panic, but into focus, he glanced back at Emily Carter, the woman who had seen the first crack and followed it all the way through, and he knew that whatever this night revealed next, she was no longer just part of the moment. She was the reason it had not been lost entirely. Daniel did not touch the glass, not this time, not any of them. His eyes moved slowly across the tray, studying the arrangement as if it were a blueprint rather than a simple service detail. And the longer he looked, the clearer it became. This was not improvisation, it was repetition. A system designed to survive interruption, to adapt, to continue even after being exposed. It is layered, Emily said quietly from behind him, her voice steady, almost analytical. Not one method, but several, each one small enough to pass unnoticed on its own. Daniel nodded once, not turning, because he saw it now, the spacing between the glasses, the slight difference in liquid level, the way one stem caught the light differently, not enough for a casual glance, but enough for someone who knew where to look. Which one? He asked, and this time the question was precise, targeted, no longer broad. Emily stepped closer, just enough to stand beside him, her presence calm, controlled. She did not reach for the tray, she did not need to. The third from the left, she said. It is not the glass, it is the residue on the rim, applied after placement, not before. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, following her indication. And there it was, a detail so small it should not matter, and yet it changed everything. He exhaled slowly, the weight of it settling in. So even if the first attempt failed, he said, this one would not. Emily gave a slight nod. That is the idea, she replied. Redundancy creates certainty. Daniel almost smiled at that, not out of humor, but recognition. The same principle applied in business, in systems, in control, except this time it had been used against him. And the only reason it had not worked was because someone had refused to ignore what did not fit. He straightened, his posture shifting from reaction to command again, but different now, more aware, more precise. Remove every glass, he said calmly, and replace them under direct supervision. His security team moved immediately. No hesitation, no confusion, because the room had already accepted that the smallest detail could no longer be trusted. Across the table, Victor finally spoke again, his voice quieter than before, almost reflective. You built an empire on control, he said, and yet it was undone by a detail you did not see. Daniel turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge him, but his focus did not waver. No, Daniel replied, his tone even. It was not undone. A brief pause, just long enough to let the distinction settle. It was revealed. The difference mattered, because what had happened tonight was not failure. It was exposure, and exposure could be corrected, improved, strengthened. Emily remained still beside him, not reacting to the exchange, not inserting herself into the moment, because she did not need to. Her role had never been about recognition. It had been about clarity. Daniel glanced at her once more, not with curiosity now, but with something closer to respect, the kind that does not need to be spoken to be understood. And in that moment, the room shifted one last time, not into tension, not into fear, but into something quieter, something more grounded, an awareness that the night had not been saved by power or position, but by attention, by the willingness to see what others had already decided did not matter. And as the last of the glasses were cleared away, Daniel Whitmore understood something he had never considered before. The strongest system is not the one that controls everything, but the one that allows someone to question what everyone else accepts without looking twice. The last glass was removed, and with it, the illusion that the room had ever been in control. The tension did not disappear. It transformed, settling into something quieter, sharper, a collective awareness that what had almost happened could not be undone, only understood. Daniel remained standing, his hand resting lightly against the edge of the table, not out of uncertainty, but restraint. Because for the first time in a long time, he was not rushing toward the next move. He was absorbing the one that had just unfolded across from him. Victor no longer tried to speak. The silence around him had become definitive, not imposed, but earned, and that was the difference. Control could be taken, but clarity had to be recognized. Emily stepped back then, not dramatically, not seeking attention, just returning to the quiet space she had occupied before any of this began, as if the moment belonged to the room, not to her. Daniel watched that movement carefully, the instinct to step away. After changing everything, the refusal to claim credit, and it told him more than any explanation could. "You were not trained for this job," he said, not loudly, but enough for her to hear. Emily paused, her hand brushing lightly against the side of a chair. Then she turned, her expression calm, unchanged. "I was trained to notice," she replied, and that was all. No elaboration, no justification, just a statement that carried its own weight. Daniel nodded slowly, not because he fully understood, but because he recognized the truth in it, the kind of truth that did not need detail to be valid. The room began to shift again, not back to normal, but forward into something new. Security moved with purpose, quiet conversations resumed in fragments, and the deal that had once been the center of the evening now sat untouched, irrelevant, because something more important had taken its place. Perspective. Daniel glanced once more at the cleared table, at the space where the glass had been, where a decision could have ended differently, and then back at Emily. "What happens now?" he asked, and the question was not about the situation anymore, not about Victor or the intercepted staff. It was about what came after clarity. Emily considered it for a moment, her eyes moving briefly across the room, not searching, just observing, and then she answered, "Now you pay attention." Her voice was soft, almost gentle, but it carried further than anything else that had been said that night. Daniel let out a quiet breath, something between a realization and a release, because for all his systems, all his strategies, all his control, the answer had been that simple, and that difficult at the same time. He straightened, his posture returning to what everyone in the room recognized, but with something added, something unseen but undeniable. And when he spoke again, his voice was steady, grounded in a way it had not been before. "From this moment on, nothing in this room is assumed," he said, and the words did not echo. They settled, becoming part of the space itself. Emily gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, then turned to leave, not waiting for acknowledgement, not expecting it, just moving forward as if her role had already ended. Daniel did not stop her this time, because he understood that some people do not stay where they are finally seen. They move on, leaving behind the standard they raised. And as the door to the service corridor closed quietly behind her, Daniel Whitmore stood in the center of a room that had not changed in structure, but had been transformed in meaning, and for the first time, he did not measure the night by what he had gained, but by what he had nearly lost, and what it had taken to see it before it was too late, because power can command attention, but it is awareness that decides what truly matters. And that night, it did not come from the man at the head of the table. It came from the one no one thought to look at twice.